so much for everyone coming out. This is really more of a treat for me. I have not taught you, and greatly appreciate the honor of being able to. And I'm thankful that each and every one of you can be here tonight. Tonight's assignment deals with continuing with the expositions of Exodus. Great study, all the lessons so far, at least what I've heard. All of them have been fantastic and been really good. But I want us to take our minds, Brother Denver, I call him brother in both ways, that I never had in my life. But I appreciate the songs that we sang. Coming to God in the way in which we are, thinking of how beautiful and how precious it is to be able to think about the precious blood of Christ and really how much of an impact that's made on our life. But I appreciate even more with the beautiful and too marvelous for words. The human being comprehend these things, but God regards. Tonight we want to talk about the idea going on, the idea of mercy this evening. When you look at the word mercy in the Bible, you're going to find meanings depending on the context. But when you're looking through the Hebrew Testament or Old Testament, you're going to be finding words such as rahim or rehim. And these words that emphasize this idea of loving kindness. And it's very closely associated with the idea of the same way that a mother taking care of a child with her, and that love and that intimate connection that only they share. That's the God I want to talk about. But in doing so, I want us to realize something. When we're talking about mercy, the first word that you see that find the word me. And I want us to have two distinct as we go throughout this study. First of which, I want you to ask yourself, what do God question, what does God with that in mind, our time this evening is talking on the idea of God's saying, "There will I meet thee." If you have your Bible, by way of introduction, let's go through our text briefly and try to discover some of the topics we talk about when we're talking about. Did a wonderful lesson on tonight. We left with Israel at Mount Sinai down at the base, in which God would say, "I brought you here on the wings of eagles so that you could come to me." And that seems a little bit odd. But as you go after the book of the covenant that's written in Exodus 24, the law, in at the tail end of chapter 24. The glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai. The cloud covered it in 6 days. And the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire. On the top of the mount, I don't know if you've ever been around before and clothes. But you jump back as a jerk reaction because you don't want to get damaged from that flame. Let's imagine ourselves at the base of Mount Sinai, heard about the God of Israel. You know that He has heard and for us from Egypt. And He does, and you see His magnificent judgments that take place, and His wonders, which leave Israel in awe. But when you're sitting there at the base of Mount Sinai and you're looking up on the mountain and you see this flame devouring the top of the mountain, wouldn't that strike a little bit of fear in you? Because you know the God of Israel is right there. As a matter of fact, if you look in verse 10 of this chapter, chapter 24, it gives us an image that Moses, Abibai, 70 of the elders saw. And it was this image that we see of God. But God doesn't that we see Him on first instinct. But He starts using terminology at the beginning of chapter 25 that almost Let's begin in verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering. Of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, ye shall take of my offering. And he giveth the precious metals, precious dyes, and the precious skins, precious oils, precious stones. Verse 3 through 7. All these things. And let them make me a sanctuary that I When we begin going through our text, God says, I do not want to intimidate you, but I want to invite you to be where I am. And He says in verse 2, I want to give an offering, but if you're going to give an offering, make sure it comes from is best. Now, when we try to, what is best? Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that thought. As you can see, text, it's almost like this list that God starts. And in verses 10 to 17, He starts. He begins to talk about the tabernacle. He says in verse 9, I'm going to give you a list of those things, the tabernacle and the pattern thereof. All the instruments thereof, so shall you. And the first thing that we find in the text is the blueprint, the pattern and the design for the Ark of the Covenant. We know the Ark is just a box. Don't think it was Ark. That's way too big. This is a small box that's about 3.5 feet wide and 2.5 feet out and 2.5 feet deep. It's really not that big of a box. But within this that I give you, that we find 42nd set of the tables of God is saying, let's have those at home. You've got old photographs and little trinkets and stuff. They don't mean anything to anybody else, but to you, they mean everything. And that's what God wanted. I want my people to remember the law that I've made with them. And I want to make a home with them. But I don't want to remember it just all by myself. This box is going to represent that. We're going to try to understand each other. But then we find 17 through 2, which leads into our focus for the evening. We find the of what's called the mercy, or the opera. And all this basically means is this piece of that's God, as you read through the text in verse 18, cherubim, these celestial bird man-like creatures, are putting their wings over top of this mercy seat. And this mercy seat is actually going to sit on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And it's going to serve as a... And God would say in verse 22. There, on the mercy seat, there will I meet with thee. All unto the children of Israel. I want to get things in mind. Within the ark, we're going to find the law of God. We are going to see where God says, I will meet with you. How beautiful is that? God, fine, purity, righteous, says to little wretch like me, sinful Israel person, I want to meet with you. Wouldn't that her demeanor? But God says, I'm going to meet you here. I'm going to show you my love. But He has an interesting way of showing that love. But where God says, I'm going to meet you above the wings of the cherubim, at the law, we have love. But most importantly, now with that in mind, I want us to look at two different concepts. First, I want us to look at the idea of God. Why exactly? He calls this piece of metal of all. When you look throughout Scripture, you're going to find that God saw that man had a problem. Now, what I mean by this, when you through out the Bible, you're going to find out really fast that there's sin here, sin here, sin here, sin here. You can't even say it without the same syllable that the serpent. Sin, sin, sin. And it takes God from a position where He notices, okay, this is mankind. When you look at Genesis chapter 6, do you remember how it described the earth there? That the earth was filled with wickedness and every person's heart was set on evil continually. But in verse 8, it says, Noah found grace in the eyes of God. Over at chapter, and we're going to find where someone else found grace in the eyes of God. But what we're going to find out is that he actually further defines what it means to find grace in the eyes of God. Genesis chapter 19, Sodom and Gomorrah is all people we find. Why? Is our answer. Look at Genesis 19, beginning in verse 19. Verse 18. Lot said unto them, O not so, my Lord. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight. And thou hast magnified thy which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Behold, now this city is near to flee unto, and it is one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not? Talking about mercy. It's something about needed and still needs God's grace. But along with that grace, all that God's grace does is it gives us a glimpse of a magnifying glass of how marvelous God's mercy really is. When you understand the principle of the idea of making a covenant, an agreement between parties, especially when we're dealing with God and someone who is not divine, someone who is elect, we're talking about someone who never deserved it in the first place. That's how we define grace typically. It's unmerited favor. But when you're looking at mercy, it's something a little bit deeper. Mercy is when someone still makes an agreement with someone, but they know they're going to be at a loss. They know they're going to have to put a little bit more extra effort into keeping this relationship alive. And when you look throughout the Bible, my, oh my, God's mercy is on every single page. And that is something truly beautiful. God solved the sin problem. But then He also gave man a promise. When you look at Leviticus chapter 16 and chapter 17, you're going to find what is called the book of Leviticus. The legislation and the practices that the Levitical priesthood had to follow. And in chapter 16, God would begin to say, and even though Nadab and Abihu died, I want you to observe one bull. And I also want you to offer a ram. I want you to kill the ram and give it as a peace offering, but this bull offering, I want you to give it as an offering for Aaron, you, and your family, your household. But I also want you as well, besides giving atonement for yourself, I want you to get 2 goats. And I want you to take 1 goat. That's going to be the offering of all of Israel. And I want you to take another goat. And that's going to be what we'll call the scapegoat, or the escape goat. This goat's going to take on, the priest is going to take his hand, put it on his head. He's going to tell the goat all the man, a strong man, as the text would say, is going to lead him out into the wilderness. And the goat there, the goat is going to face the eternal wrath of God. Walk around forever. But this goat that is slain, you are going to take this goat, and you're going to take his blood, and you're actually going to go into this place that is called, 1 Kings 5 would call it the oracle. So that's, but in Leviticus we call it the design of the tabernacle. We're not going to find this altar that you just sacrifice on. The priest has to do the sacrifice. Behind this brazen altar, you're going to find this silver laver where the priest would wash himself. But as you go further into the tabernacle, you're going to be stopped by this veil. This blue and purple and scarlet material that's just intertwined together. And you see these images of these weird birds called earth. When you look at that, you would already know. You walk past this veil, you're actually seeing what's called the holy place. You're going to find the table of showbread on one side. You're going to find a candlestick on another side, and you're going to see another veil, almost like what you just walked through, on the other end. But before that, you're going to see this altar that has incense burning on it. There's this smoke. Why? The blood of the bull. He's going to take the blood of the goat. And he's going to go in. The Ark of the Covenant is resting. And he's going to sprinkle 7 times on the east side, 7 times on the west side, both 7 times both sides with the bull and 7 times both sides with the goat. And once he does that, then the sins are going to be atoned for. But there's something that's of all things, if you would think God is a loving God, an all-knowing God, this God is going to be the same God who's going to give us a way of sacrificing that is really body all. That God says you are animal. But especially when it comes to animals, chapter 17, if you eat the blood of these animals, they have laws. But if you eat the animal that you eat it along with the blood. The Bible would tell us in verse 10, that man is going to be accursed. And he tells us why exactly that is accursed. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. I've given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for souls, for it is the blood that maketh atonement for souls. When you make a sacrifice, the reason you put the blood on the mercy seat, also on the other articles or the other inventory things in the holy place, outer court of the tabernacle, when you sprinkle the blood on that, so you can reconcile and fix this relationship that we have that's been severed because of sin. And he would say there at verse 11, when you give this blood, this precious life, living blood, you need to understand a little bit for others. I've been a lot of stuff. I realize. But Milton Terry would quote whenever he's talking about the idea of blood. Atonement embodies a threefold idea. First, that having been guilty of sin, knowledge that I've sinned. God, I realize the problem. I need to turn to you. He then had his life, or that life, forfeit on sacrifice. It must be surrendered to divine justice. If there's sin in my life, and there's no such thing as God's grace, by definition, I deserve God's justice, because God is a just God, is He not? God is an all-loving God, but only within the realms of, as we talked about last night, if you're going to be a kingdom of priests, they had to do what? They had to keep His commands. They had to obey the covenant. But that's the second part. You need to give a sacrifice so that you don't get that judgment put upon you, the wrath of God. But finally, that is surrendered in the way appointed. Life was given back to the individual again by God, meaning he became reestablished as a justified person in divine favor and fellowship. The blood of the animal would give atonement for the sins of the person giving the lamb or the ox or the goat or the ram, whatever the sacrifice was, realized in return, I'm giving a life for a life. Of God's wrath. You remember what happened to Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus 10? When they offered strange fire before the Lord and they were consumed in front of everyone? God's serious when it comes to His commandments. Now, He doesn't do that today, yes. Think about the do you realize that you sin every day? Isn't that what Romans 3:23 says? You've sinned, you've fallen short of the glory of God. Now, with that said, how are you going to fix it? What could you possibly offer God that could actually grant or merit any kind of favor whatsoever from Him? And He would say, you know what, based upon who you are as an individual, that's fine. Not a single one of us in this room, not a single individual in the camp of Israel could do anything of themselves to show God, I am good. My life, my blood, my soul. To face divine wrath. Remember, this is the fiery image that we have before Sinai. And the children of Israel are sitting there and they're like, what's going on? And when you look in chapter 19, verse 16 and following, it says there was thunderings, there was lightnings, and there was a cloud, and it came down on the mountain. And the people were standing back like, what is this? It is a face it. So we need to realize the importance behind the principle of atonement. There's something there you could never give, and something else needs to take its place. There's one more thing. When we're looking at the mercy of God, at least in long view from the children of Israel here in the tabernacle, we realize throughout the Bible, the book of Joshua and Judges, things don't quite go well. As a matter of fact, they just do whatever they want to do. There was no king. You can't tell me what to do. We can just go about and do whatever we want. When we're introduced to the children of Israel again in 1 Samuel, they're saying we need to bring the ark of the Lord out because He was with us in the wilderness. He was with us when we were taking over the promised land, though we didn't chase out all of the inhabitants. And they treated it more like an idol rather than appreciating it for what it was, in which the ark of the Lord had been taken. Whoa, what's going to happen? And all those curses happened to the Philistines and all the other nations that took part in it. We don't want this. Fast forward. You get to the there's a couple of good Solomon. You get the divided kingdom, and there's very few to none good kings. As a matter of fact, it would tell us that in Jeremiah chapter 6, tell us that there was a time it came to pass when you will be multiplied and increased in the land. Israel, you have flourished. You've been luxurious. Yes, everything's going great for you, but for those in those days, saith the Lord, they shall say no more. The covenant of the Lord. Such a thing. Salvation. No longer think back to the wandering in the wilderness. They will no longer think back to how God was with us in Egypt, and He led us out of Egypt. They will no longer remember how God was with them when they were victorious for the most part, taking the promised land. However, though the Ark of the Covenant is going to go away, it is the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat. 19 through 20. Open to me the gates of righteousness. I will go in unto them. I will praise the Lord. The gates of the Lord into which righteous shall enter. I will praise thee. For thou hast heard me, and thou art come, my salvation. And this next phrase that we find here, it's this longing. There's coming a day we've been separated from God. We don't have the tabernacle anymore. We don't have the Ark of the Covenant anymore. And we're trying to figure out, what do we do? Yes. Hey. The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner. Isn't that great? What does that mean? The psalmist would say as well, this is the Lord's doing, and it when God opens up that passageway, that relationship that we once had in the past, then we can rejoice. We can say, the glory be to God. Blessed be God of His mercies. The psalmist wouldn't say in Psalm 136, give thanks to the God. Why? For His goodness, for His mercy endures forever. Give thanks unto the God of gods, for His mercy endureth forever. Give thanks unto the Lord of lords, for His mercy endureth forever. 22 more times in the chapter he would say the same thing. His mercy, His mercy, His mercy, His mercy. Give thanks unto the God of heaven. For His mercy endures forever. Israel was longing for this mercy. They were longing for God's grace. And it came on such a day when we look at the Lamb, the sacrifice that God... John the Baptist standing there, he's going to say, okay, I'm baptizing people here. And we find chapter 1. He's going to say, when he sees Jesus, behold, the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of not just you and you and the world. God's sacrifice. And He's giving it to me? I am the door. The sheep hear my voice. The shepherd lays down his life. I tried to say it in Luke. He would say, there's really no one. And God is so pure. He is so holy. He is so set apart from everything. Try to find a way for the same thing. For you to bear my image. For you to dwell with not just me, Jesus. I mean, I may be a mere man. And though men may say, I'm just a prophet, I'm just John the Baptist, I'm Elias, or Jeremiah, the prophet. Who do you? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Yes, He was a prophet, but He was something much more. Yes, He was the Son of God. He was, and He is, and will always be. Am. The idea that God saw that man in trouble. God decided to offer man salvation. Jesus said, I'm going to lay down my life for you. When you partake of this cup, it represents my blood, which was shed for you. Jesus starts making all of these statements here and there, and it doesn't really ring a bell. But all of a sudden, up there on the cross, He's saying all of these things. Quiet. It's calm. Mary Magdalene rose early in the morning, and she went to the tomb, and the tomb was open. Did not Jesus say He was going to die and be raised on the third day? Did not Jesus say that He was going to put His final enemy to death? Didn't Jesus say that God has something special in store for you? Not just Israel, but He has something special in store for everyone who comes before and after that time. Something unique that no single animal could ever do. And that is a human being that could personally live. Jesus did that. And when He rose from the grave, Paul would tell us in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, He rose, He was victorious, He triumphed. Peter would say, this is that I will make your enemies thy footstool. Who's going to sit upon David's throne? You're the one who crucified the man. But this man was trying to help you the entire time. And he can still help you at this present time. You see, the problem in the Old Testament, it wasn't the fact that the law was tainted or imperfect in any way. The book of Hebrews would tell us in chapter 8 that the old law was actually pointing ahead to something better, something greater. And it would tell us at the latter end of chapter 8 that God had found fault with, not the law, but He found fault with the people. Look at Hebrews chapter 8 and verse. For finding fault with them, He saith, God saith, behold, the days will come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, and not with the house of Judah. What He's not saying is I'm making a very selective covenant. He's saying it's not just for Judah alone. It's going to be for everybody. But this won't be according to what I made with their father in the day that I took them by the hand. Lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. There is coming a day where God says, I'll give you something greater, something better. And it's this. We can't go through it because there's so many concepts that we deal with. I want us to look at Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 9. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 9. Christ said, I'm going to offer you salvation. But how He did that? We already in chapter 8, He's going to get rid of the old covenant. It's almost like He picks up this same. Then said He, verse 9, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first that He may establish, by which we are sanctified. How? Through the offering of the body of redeemed by a human being? You're telling me someone had aspiration, dreams, and he could have been anything that he wanted to be. He offered His life for me. Writer, though he's talking to a bunch of Jews, the Bible tells us time and time again, Jesus came to save that to call the righteous to repentance, but sinners. Which of us are one? But when you look at the way in which He has offered salvation, and you look particularly at the blood of Christ Himself, I would reference you to chapter. Though we already made reference to Romans chapter 3, verse 23, Paul is building up this argument. He's talking about there should have been salvation to an extent in the old law. But when Jesus came, He actually established something better. And it's not that He showed God's grace, but that He showed God's mercy. No, something even better. He didn't just show God's mercy. He was and is God's mercy. Look at the text, Romans chapter 3, beginning in verse 21. But now, right now, the righteousness of God without law is manifest. How can we be right unto God without the Old Testament law? Well, Paul is saying that it's available now. But how? In His sight, for the law is manifest, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. The law told us there was coming a better prophet, there was coming a better promise involved. There were prophets coming around saying there's a better king, there's a better kingdom, there's a better place involved. Okay, so the Old Testament is leading up to this, whoever it is. So what? Even the righteousness of God, which is by faith. Jesus Christ. My Jesus. Faith in in Him, but not just faith in Him. He goes a little deeper. Not that I just believe that He's the Son of God. Not just for a select few, but unto all and upon all them that believe. Faith, a substance, assurance of things hoped for. I'm longing for salvation. But I believe that Jesus Christ is God's Son. But it's not just in that. More. Verse 23. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. I draw your mind back to Leviticus 6:17, though we didn't go through it. God would say, if you enter into a place any other time of the year than just the time that is appointed, you will die. You remember Uzziah? Do you remember what happened to him whenever he touched the Ark of the Covenant? He died. Why? Because it was holy. What was Uzziah? He had good intentions. He had forgotten the warning, and as a consequence, a life of unrighteousness, touching and meeting life of unrighteousness, does not mix. In the place of God's glory, where He would sit upon the mercy seat, God says, you have fallen short. I have fallen short. Every single person who has ever lived, besides Christ, has fallen short of God's glory. You've lost that before. Being justified freely by His grace, God's grace, through redemption that is found where? It's not in a bull. It's not in a goat. It's not in a literal lamb. It's found in Him because of what we find in verse 25. He has set to be a propitiation, an atonement, an elasterion, that which takes my place when I deserve to be there. And He took it all for set Him as a propitiation through faith in His what? Verse 5 it also uses the same Greek word that we find here in Romans 2. Christ. Mercy. You want to see mercy? You want to see God's grace, glory? Find Jesus, and you'll find mercy. We look further in the text as this you declare His righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. To declare, I say, at this time, His righteousness, God's righteousness, that He might be just and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. Atonement, a relationship I do not deserve, the ending consequence of this. God says, you've got a sin problem. You need that taken care of. How do we fix it? Well, it's not through animals. It's through Christ. He offers this salvation in such a way to where He says, now is the time. Not in the old law where you were all about the animals, but rather now is the time where the righteousness, that which makes me holy, where I have that relationship that Adam and Eve had before sin entered into the garden. Do you know what that means? God, when I'm righteous. But not only do I get to walk with God when I'm righteous, but I also get to behold the glory of God through a glass darkly, as we find in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. I see the glory of the Lord from the message of the Spirit, that which gives life, that which gives hope, that which gives mercy. But how do I come in contact with that? Do you realize in Galatians chapter 3, verse 26 and 27, it would tell us as have many of you as have been baptized into Christ, have put on Christ. But take it a step further. Do you realize that the aspect of baptism is not only the idea of being put into Christ, but in Romans chapter 6 it would tell us that we actually get to partake in the crucifixion of Christ. We partake of His death. We die to sin. We are buried with Him under the watery grave of baptism. And then we rise again in newness of life. If that's not mercy, what is that? It is through our experience with God, where God says, if you're going to give 25 of your heart, you give it to me willingly, so that I, verse, to dwell. Didn't Jesus say that if you abide in my commandments, I and my Father will dwell with you? Isn't it the case whenever we think about the idea of mercy? Doesn't the Hebrew writer say in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15 and 16, that we can approach the throne of grace that we may find mercy in the time of need? Look at Genesis. There is a beautiful story, and we're not going in depth with this story. Find a father. Place that I know I'm don't want to say, okay, I'm going to devote him to the service. I want that God promised to resurrect him even after he died. I want you to walk. We're walking with God at this point, in which we find, beginning in verse 3, Abraham rose up early in the morning, and the two of his young men with him and Isaac his son played the burnt offering. He rose up and went unto the place which God had told him. And on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. You're walking with God at this very moment. Or not. Walking along with the Father, and God says, you see that place? Yeah, I see it. Do you know what that place is? Abraham said to his young men in verse 5, I want you to abide here while me and the lad go up to worship him. And Abraham took the burnt offering, laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and his knife, and they both of them went together. And Isaac and Abraham his father said, my father, that here I am. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Oh. You keep walking with God. And you start to look around, and God has put some wood on your back. Knife. See the fire or the fire starters. God, where's the offering? Where's the lamb? Very comforting to know that Abraham said, God will provide. But when you look at verse, they go to the place that God had told Abraham and his son to go to. And Abraham bound his son, laid the wood in order, laid his son there on the altar. Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Wait. Your test is over. And you put up this wooden post. And the knife is right there. He's about to pin you up there. When all of a sudden, verse 13, someone else comes into the picture. The lamb that God promised He would provide has come. And our Savior running up there saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be late. Let me take His place. Let me take His place. He cannot do this, only I can. And God says, stay on. Gives Him in your place. Paul would say it better this way. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. That should have been me up there for my sin. But I'm not good enough to do that. It's not I die, but Christ that lives. That first word. If you are not a child of God this evening, there is so much we could say about God's mercy. But the most important thing is that when God is His Son in you, that is something beautiful. But when you don't realize the value of what God has done, why does it matter? Have you sinned? Have. What are you going to do for it? What are you going to do about it? Who are you going to give? What are you going to give? What God would say? Not there. Show you. That Christ is the Lamb of God. Behold His glory. Behold His mercy and His love and His compassion. Christ cares so much. If you believe that your sins, you can't confess that Christ is Lord. Christ is. So that you can meet with God, and God will forever be with you as long as you're faithful to His commands. If you found that maybe tonight you're in need of God's mercy, you're an erring child of God, it's a fearful thing to fall into God's wrath. Don't leave here tonight knowing, I'm not ready. If there's any way we can help you tonight,